They thought locking me in the freezing server room overnight would teach me to stay quiet. They did not know it was the only room holding the backup data they had not wiped. By morning, I found a forged confession, a multi-million-dollar contract built on fake tests, and a list of women ousted before me. When that heavy door opened at 6 in the morning, those men realized they had locked in the wrong person. My name is Alice Morris. I am 35 years old. I work as a disaster recovery specialist at Auraline Grid Technologies, a major infrastructure tech firm based in St. Louis. Right now, I am standing alone in the sub-basement server room. The ambient temperature in this room is rigidly locked at 64 degrees. I am wearing a sleeveless silk blouse, a thin pencil skirt, and sheer tights. The cold bites into my bare arms like hundreds of tiny needles. It seeps through the thin soles of my work heels. The noise surrounding me is a constant, deafening mechanical roar from the massive cooling units designed to keep the data racks from melting down. Just 2 hours ago, I was standing under the warm, dim ambient lighting of the executive lounge on the top floor. The company was hosting an internal after-hours party. The mood was triumphant. Mason Crow, my direct supervisor, stood at the front of the room holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. He smiled his polished, perfectly practiced corporate smile. He looked right at the board of directors and announced that our new data infrastructure was fully deployed and operational. He called the project a flawless victory. He declared the system completely ready for the upcoming client presentation. I could not let that lie stand. I did not raise my hand. I did not wait for permission from anyone. I simply spoke. My voice cut straight through the polite applause and the clinking of glasses. I told the entire room that the critical failover test was never truly completed. I explained, clearly and professionally, that we only ran a simulated environment. We never executed a live stress test on the actual servers. I told them you cannot legally or ethically certify a disaster recovery protocol without pulling the plug on the main grid to see if the secondary backup catches the fall. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the lounge. Mason stared at me. His smile froze on his face. His eyes went entirely dead. To him, this was not a technical clarification from a concerned specialist. This was deliberate sabotage. I had just humiliated him in front of the exact people who sign his massive bonus checks. The party ended abruptly after my comment. People shuffled out of the room, avoiding eye contact. Excuses were muttered. I walked back down to my desk to pack my leather bag, intending to go home. That was when Mason appeared. He was not alone. Bryce Danner from the operations team and Leon Pike from finance walked right behind him. They flanked me. None of them raised their voices. They moved with the quiet, synchronized precision of predators who know they have trapped their prey. "We need to check the physical array downstairs," Mason said. His tone was flat and totally devoid of emotion. "You are coming with us, Alice." I refused at first. I told them my shift was over and I was going home. Bryce immediately stepped into my path, blocking the aisle. Leon moved closely to my right side. They silently herded me toward the secure freight elevator. When we reached the subterranean technical floor, Leon held out his heavy hand. "Hand over your phone," Leon demanded. "You know the security protocol, sensitive area security restrictions. No personal recording devices are allowed inside the main server hub." I knew the official policy. I also knew perfectly well that nobody ever enforced it for senior technical staff, but I was outnumbered by 3 men. We were standing in a soundproofed concrete hallway deep underground. I handed my phone over. I assumed we were simply going to have a harsh, off-the-record verbal reprimand. I assumed Mason was going to yell at me where the Human Resources Department could not hear him. Mason swiped his red secure keycard. The heavy reinforced steel door of the main server room hissed open. A harsh blast of frigid, conditioned air hit my face. Mason stepped aside and gestured for me to enter the dark room. The very second I crossed the threshold, Bryce grabbed the thick metal handle of the door. Mason leaned his head in. "A night of quiet reflection will do you good, Alice," Mason whispered, an ugly smirk spreading across his face. It will give you plenty of time to remember your proper place in this company." The heavy steel door slammed shut. The magnetic lock engaged with a loud, final clank. I stood there in the freezing noise. I did not scream for help. I did not pound my fists against the thick, bulletproof glass window of the door. Screaming only wastes precious energy. Pounding only bruises your hands. I wrapped my arms tightly around my chest and aggressively rubbed my shoulders. I was absolutely freezing, but I was not crying. Not a single tear formed in my eyes. The intense anger burning deep in the pit of my stomach was vastly stronger than my physical fear. They genuinely thought the extreme cold would break me. They thought total isolation would force me into quiet submission. I began walking down the narrow aisles. Rows upon rows of towering black steel cabinets flanked me on both sides. Blue and green indicator lights blinked rapidly in the dark. The perforated floor tiles were raised to allow the chilled air to blast directly upward from below. Every step I took echoed faintly over the overwhelming roar of the ventilation fans. I needed to keep my body moving to keep my blood flowing. At the far end of the third server aisle, I noticed a pale white glow that did not match the steady, rhythmic blinking of the hardware racks. It was a secondary control monitor. It sat on a rolling metal crash cart, tucked deeply into a dark corner. I remembered that Mason had been down here much earlier in the evening to run his fake simulated tests. He is a profoundly arrogant man. Arrogant men always get sloppy. He had locked his primary session on the main console near the entrance, but he had completely forgotten to log out of this secondary terminal. The screensaver was slowly bouncing a generic corporate logo across the display. I touched the trackpad. The screen instantly woke up. It demanded a password, but the command line interface running in the background was still executing a diagnostic script. Mason had minimized the terminal window, but the edge of the application frame was barely visible. I used a simple keyboard shortcut to bring the active window to the front of the screen. The system did not prompt me for any security credentials, because the session was already fully authenticated under Mason's administrator token. I leaned in closer to the glowing screen. The freezing air blowing continuously from the vent directly above my head suddenly did not matter to me at all. The terminal was displaying an active task scheduler. There was a queued batch file with a very strange code name attached to it. I quickly opened the advanced properties of the scheduled task. It was an automated script set to trigger at exactly 6:15 a.m. I checked the specific payload of the script. It was a scheduled outbound email job. I dug deeper into the routing details. My heart started hitting my ribs like a heavy hammer. The email was scheduled to be sent directly from my personal internal corporate account. They had somehow spoofed my security credentials. The draft message was fully prepared and waiting. I could not read the full body text from this limited command line view, but I could clearly read the subject line and the list of recipients. The message was going to the entire executive board, the legal department, and human resources. The subject line read as a formal admission of critical configuration errors and an immediate resignation of my duties. They were not just trying to scare me into silence. They were actively framing me for the failure of the entire project. I stepped back from the metal cart. I took a deep, freezing breath of the recycled air. All the disconnected pieces of the evening rapidly clicked together in my mind. Mason, Bryce, and Leon, the forced march down to the restricted sub-basement, the sudden confiscation of my mobile phone, the locked steel door. They desperately needed me entirely off the grid tonight. They needed me completely unable to access my email or the corporate network while that forged message was automatically sent out. By the time the day shift finally opened this door tomorrow morning, the fake email would have been sitting in the board members' inboxes for several hours. I would look like a hysterical, incompetent employee who broke the multi-million-dollar system, panicked, sent a pathetic confession, and hid in the server room out of shame. If they were confident enough to lock me in here, it meant they deeply believed the entire system was clean. They believed they had successfully erased every single piece of evidence showing their tests were faked. They believed the only remaining truth was the false narrative they had just manufactured. They made a fatal mistake. They completely forgot who I am and what I do. I am a disaster recovery specialist. My entire professional career is built on finding important things that people believe have been permanently destroyed. My specific job is to resurrect dead data from the absolute ashes of catastrophic system failures. I know the deep architecture of this network vastly better than Mason ever will. I know the hidden pathways, the shadow backups, and the redundant system logs that absolutely cannot be manually deleted without triggering a hard hardware alarm at the main utility provider. I looked back at the glowing monitor. I checked the system clock. I had roughly 8 hours until that forged email was scheduled to send. I had 8 full hours of uninterrupted, unsupervised, root-level access to the physical heart of the Oraline Grid Technologies network. I pulled a cold metal folding chair from the corner and sat down directly in front of the crash cart. The icy metal bit sharply through my thin skirt, but I completely ignored the pain. I slowly cracked my knuckles. I was not going to spend this long night merely trying to survive the bitter cold. I was not going to huddle in a dark corner and passively wait for my arrogant captors to let me out in the morning. I was going to fiercely use this night to dig up every single buried sin they thought was gone forever. I was going to find the raw, unaltered data. I was going to find the undeniable truth. When that heavy steel door finally opens at 6 in the morning, those men will expect to find a broken, shivering woman begging to keep her job. They do not know they just locked themselves in a cage with the one person who can tear their entire lives apart. They brought me into Oraline Grid Technologies exactly 6 months ago. The recruitment pitch was an absolute masterpiece of corporate flattery. The executive team practically rolled out a red carpet for me. My professional resume was not just good, it was entirely bulletproof. 2 years prior, I had single-handedly salvaged a massive data infrastructure for a national insurance conglomerate during a Category 5 hurricane on the Gulf Coast. While their primary data centers flooded and executives panicked, I sat in a windowless bunker for 48 hours straight, calmly rerouting petabytes of sensitive client data to secondary hubs. I saved them tens of millions of dollars in potential liabilities. I built a rock-solid reputation in this industry for possessing absolute ice in my veins during a crisis. That was the exact phrase the headhunter used over our expensive lunch. Ice in my veins. It took less than 7 days to understand the actual reality of my new position. Oraline did not want a brilliant engineer who could identify structural weaknesses and fix them. They did not want my voice. They only wanted my reputation. They needed a highly credible, industry-respected name to rubber stamp their precarious, half-built architecture. I was nothing more than a shiny hood ornament on a car with a failing engine. Mason Crowe was the chief architect of my professional vanishing act. His method was incredibly insidious because it was wrapped in a thick, protective layer of plausible deniability. In the internal company emails, the ones blindly copied to human resources and senior management, he showered me with glowing praise. He called me a critical asset, a technical genius, and a pillar of the engineering department. Yet, whenever the heavy oak doors of the executive conference room closed for the actual strategy meetings, I was mysteriously left off the calendar invite. He isolated me in the technical trenches. I did all the grueling, heavy lifting. I built the complex recovery models, wrote the dense algorithmic scripts, and mapped the failover redundancies. But I remained entirely invisible to the people writing the checks and making the decisions. Bryce Danner played his own pathetic role in this slow, deliberate erasure. He was a man whose entire technical vocabulary consisted of empty buzzwords he had memorized from a weekend management seminar. Yet, week after week, he would take my detailed slide decks, slap a new title font on them, and present my raw data to the stakeholders as if he had birthed the complex concepts himself. I would sit in my cubicle outside the glass-walled conference room, watching him point confidently at my proprietary network topology diagrams. When the meetings ended, Bryce would stroll over to my desk, pat the acoustic partition, and hand me trivial assignments. "We really need someone detail-oriented to audit the software license renewals," Bryce would say, flashing a blindingly white, deeply insincere smile. "You are just so good at the little things, Alice. The menial stuff really suits your meticulous nature." When I tried to push back against this treatment, when I stood up and pointed out critical flaws in their projected deployment timelines. The tone shifted immediately. I was pulled into closed-door one-on-one sessions. Mason would lean back in his expensive ergonomic chair, steeple his fingers together, and use his quiet, faux-concerned voice. "You are coming across as overly intense, Alice," he would say, staring at me with cold eyes. "You are getting way too emotional about a simple logistical pivot. We need team players here, not disruptors. You need to dial back the aggression." It was a classic, suffocating double standard that I had seen 100 times before. If a male engineer had aggressively pointed out a fatal system vulnerability, they would have called him decisive, praised his leadership, and promoted him on the spot. When I did exactly the same thing, using exactly the same data, I was labeled hysterical, overly sensitive, and difficult to manage. They weaponized my professionalism against me. The real sickness at Auraline went far deeper than routine workplace sexism or stolen credit. About 3 months into my tenure, I began to notice alarming inconsistencies in the system architecture. I was reviewing the deployment logs for a recent localized stress test. The data output looked entirely synthetic. Network latency metrics do not resolve into perfectly rounded numbers in a live, chaotic environment. Real data is messy. Real data fluctuates. The numbers I was looking at were entirely too clean. They looked like they had been generated by a basic script designed specifically to mimic success. I started asking sharper questions. I formally requested the raw packet capture logs from the server room. Instead of answers, I received a chilling administrative response. Every single time I dug a little deeper into the testing methodology, my administrative access rights were quietly curtailed. First, I lost read access to the financial auditing folders. A week later, my security clearance for the primary deployment staging area was abruptly revoked. Whenever I submitted an IT support ticket to restore my access, the help desk responded with a generic automated message stating my current role no longer required that specific tier of clearance. They were systematically blinding me, forcing me to operate in the dark. The breaking point of my denial arrived exactly 1 month ago. A female colleague from the internal audit department abruptly resigned. She was a meticulous, exceptionally quiet woman who never caused trouble and always kept her head down. On her final afternoon in the office, she walked past my cubicle holding a small cardboard box filled with her personal belongings. She stopped, looked nervously over her shoulder to ensure the hallway was entirely empty, and leaned in dangerously close to my ear. Her voice was trembling. "Do not sign anything just because they say it is a standard formality," she whispered, her eyes wide with genuine fear. "Read every single line. Protect yourself, Alice. They are not who they pretend to be." She walked away toward the elevators before I could even ask her what she meant. I spent the next 3 weeks secretly auditing the compliance registry during my lunch breaks. At first, I thought I was simply dealing with a profoundly toxic corporate culture. I thought Mason and Bryce were just greedy, deeply insecure men trying to secure a larger year-end bonus by cutting corners on the testing phase. Then I found the signed compliance certificates. My heart dropped completely into my stomach. My digital signature, the highly secure cryptographic key explicitly tied to my professional engineering license, was stamped boldly across the final approval lines of 4 major system readiness documents. I had never seen those documents in my life. I had never reviewed the underlying data. I certainly had never authorized my signature to be attached to them. Standing in that freezing, roaring server room, the realization hit me all over again. The ambient cold of the sub-basement feels exactly like the icy dread that washed over me when I saw those forged signatures. The puzzle pieces of the last 6 months have finally snapped together into a horrifyingly clear picture. The forced isolation, the stolen credit, the fake tests, the deliberately shrinking access rights, the forged signatures. They hired me specifically because of my pristine reputation for saving sinking ships, but they never intended to let me fix their dangerously broken system. They intentionally kept the infrastructure fragile and flawed. They needed a highly credible, extremely competent scapegoat. They were deliberately setting up a massive, lucrative failure, and they were meticulously arranging the paperwork so that when the inevitable catastrophic crash happened, the federal investigators, the angry clients, and the media would look squarely at me. They did not just want to bury my career to stroke their own egos. They were actively constructing a false narrative where I was the sole architect of a massive corporate fraud. They locked me in this server room tonight to finish setting their elaborate trap, entirely confident that by the time the sun came up and the heavy steel door opened, I would be perfectly positioned as their silent, terrified human shield. They thought my spirit would break in the cold. They thought 6 months of psychological conditioning had made me weak enough to accept the blame. They were wrong. I sit in front of the glowing monitor of the secondary crash cart. I do not need to execute some flashy, cinematic cyber attack to bypass their security. Real system administration is not about typing furious lines of code while digital alarms blare in the background. It is about knowing exactly where the careless architects left the back doors wide open. In a Tier 4 data facility like this one, there is always a dedicated storage cluster known as an immutable backup. This is a highly specialized piece of hardware designed to take continuous, read-only snapshots of the entire network state. Middle managers like Mason fundamentally misunderstand the concept of immutable storage. They treat it like a standard digital archive. They genuinely do not realize that the data written here cannot be altered, overwritten, or wiped by standard administrative network commands. It is the permanent, unchangeable memory of the entire building. I navigate through the unmapped directory structures using command line prompts that have not changed in 20 years. The freezing air continues to blast against my bare shoulders, turning my skin entirely numb, but my focus is absolute and unbreakable. I mount the first hidden snapshot volume from 2 weeks ago. The undeniable truth immediately spills out onto the screen in neat, indisputable rows of raw text. I open the failover execution logs. These are the exact system stress tests Mason had proudly touted to the board of directors just a few hours ago. The hidden metadata tells a completely different, horrifying story. The original, unaltered system logs show a catastrophic failure rate. The secondary servers timed out. Massive amounts of data packets were dropped completely. The redundant array failed to catch the heavy load. But right next to those raw failing logs is the modified final report that Bryce submitted to the executive team. Someone logged in, manually manipulated the execution timestamps, and forcefully changed the final status codes from a complete system failure to a green tag that read, "Completed successfully." They took a profoundly broken architecture and simply painted over the cracks with forged data. I close the first log and pull up the second snapshot. This one contains a massive, heavily encrypted directory tucked quietly inside a generic daily operations folder. I bypass the weak local encryption key using a standard administrator override and open the contents. It is a large cache of high-definition video files. I click the most recent file. The media player launches, brightly illuminating my pale face in the dark, roaring room. It is a recording of Mason, Bryce, and the rest of their core team. They are standing in the main executive conference room, rehearsing the massive data recovery presentation scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. I watch the video closely as Mason explains how the system supposedly handles a major power grid failure, but I am an engineer, and I am looking at the terminal windows projected behind him. The IP addresses do not belong to the production network. The directory structures are isolated. They are running the entire demonstration inside a tightly controlled sandbox. It is a choreographed stage play. The robust system they are showing off does not exist in the real world. Now I need to see the exact weapon they plan to use against me. I isolate the background task I discovered earlier, the one scheduled to execute at 15 minutes past 6 in the morning. Using the root-level diagnostic tools, I carefully force the system to unspool the hidden payload without actually triggering the live send command. The full text of the drafted email populates my screen. It is written perfectly in my own professional voice. It is addressed to the entire executive board, the legal team, and human resources. The text explicitly states that I have recently discovered catastrophic, deeply embedded flaws in the core architecture. It says I must formally confess to recent configuration errors that I supposedly made. The email falsely claims that I executed a series of unauthorized, desperate modifications to the codebase over the past 3 days in a frantic attempt to fix my own terrible mistakes. It says I take full, unconditional responsibility for the current system instability. It ends with my immediate, deeply apologetic resignation. The trap is flawlessly designed. Tomorrow afternoon, when Mason attempts to run the live demonstration for the real clients, the system will genuinely crash because it is fundamentally broken and cannot handle the load. When that catastrophic failure happens in front of a room full of powerful stakeholders, Mason will simply look shocked. Pull up this forged confession email that conveniently arrived early in the morning and point the finger directly at the emotionally unstable woman who locked herself in the server room out of immense guilt. I am the scapegoat for their technical failure. My anger shifts into a cold, highly calculated drive. I dig much deeper into the system architecture, tracing the digital fingerprints left on the modified documents. Every single time a file is altered on a secure corporate network, a silent, invisible audit log records the exact user token that made the change. I pull the raw metadata from the forged failover reports. Bryce Danner left his secure digital signature smeared all over the manipulated timestamps. He was the one manually typing in the fake success metrics while pretending to be a brilliant operations manager. Then I pivot my search to the internal financial ledgers. I cross-reference the dates of the fake tests with the project budget approvals. I find a series of heavily redacted purchase orders authorized directly by Leon Pike. He formally approved the transfer of hundreds of thousands of dollars to a deeply suspicious third-party subcontractor for emergency software optimization. I run a quick query on the subcontractor. There was no optimization software ever delivered. The money simply vanished into a shell entity, approved by the exact same finance director who stood behind me and forced me down into this freezing basement tonight. I keep pulling the digital thread until I hit the absolute bottom of the conspiracy. Tucked deep inside a restricted legal compliance folder, I find a master bid proposal. It is a massive, 200-page legal document submitted to a municipal client I have never heard of before. The entity is called the Rivergate Mobility Authority. I read through the executive summary. It is a massive government contract to build the failover infrastructure for an entire urban traffic and transit grid. The dollar amount attached to the bid is absolutely staggering, totaling tens of millions of dollars. I frantically scroll down to the organizational chart attached to the bid proposal. My breath catches sharply in my throat. There, printed in bold black letters at the very top of the technical hierarchy, is my name. The legal document prominently features my professional biography, highly emphasizing my successful recovery of the hurricane-damaged systems 2 years ago. It officially lists me as the ultimate chief architect and the sole executive director of the entire recovery program for the Rivergate project. I have never been given a single shred of actual authority in this building. I have been deliberately kept in the dark, treated like a glorified assistant, and systematically isolated from every major decision. Yet, on paper, to the outside world, and to the government, I am running the entire multi-million-dollar show. The sheer, breathtaking scale of the deception washes over me, chilling me far more than the aggressively cold air pumping into the room. I finally understand the absolute, undeniable truth of my employment here. I was never recruited to be promoted. I was never hired to elevate my career or bring my actual technical expertise to this company. They needed a highly credible, intensely respected industry veteran to act as the undeniable face of a massive, fraudulent government contract. They built a multi-million-dollar house of cards, slapped my pristine professional reputation on the front door to pass the initial rigid government audits, and then meticulously prepared a perfectly timed narrative to completely destroy me the exact second the fragile structure collapsed. They are going to steal tens of millions of dollars, blame the inevitable catastrophic failure on the hysterical female engineer, fire me in disgrace, and walk away completely clean with the stolen funds. The physical cold in the room suddenly feels entirely insignificant compared to the absolute, razor-sharp ice forming in my own veins. I am not just going to survive this night. I am going to burn their entire fabricated world straight to the ground. I am deep into the 3rd terabyte of archived directories when the heavy mechanical clank of the main door lock shatters the steady, deafening hum of the cooling units. My fingers instantly freeze over the keyboard. I quickly minimize the active command windows, plunging the secondary monitor back into its dark, generic screensaver. I stand up slowly, my joints aching and stiff from the relentless chill. I brace myself, fully expecting Mason or Bryce to walk back inside. I assume they have decided that a few hours in the icebox was enough to secure my total compliance. Instead, the heavy steel door pulls open just enough for a narrow slice of warm, yellow hallway light to pierce the gloom. A woman steps inside. She is wearing a dark blue utility jumpsuit with the building management insignia stitched over the breast pocket. A heavy canvas tool belt hangs securely from her waist. She stops dead in her tracks when she sees me standing next to the metal crash cart. "Who are you?" she asks. Her voice is low, steady, and thoroughly confused. There is absolutely no scheduled maintenance down here tonight. I only came down because the zone sensors threw a localized heat anomaly warning from this specific aisle. I do not answer immediately. My mind races through a dozen different calculations. Is she part of it? Did Mason send her down here to check on me? I cross my bare arms tightly across my chest, trying desperately to suppress a violent shiver. I tell her my name. I tell her I do not have my phone or my security badge. The woman narrows her eyes, looking closely at my thin silk blouse and my bare legs. She looks over her shoulder at the heavy magnetic lock on the inside of the door, then back to me. Her plastic name tag reads, Naomi Mercer. Naomi does not reach for the heavy two-way radio clipped to her belt. She does not shout or demand explanations. She simply studies my face in the dim light. I am expecting her to call the night security guards, to treat me like a rogue employee who somehow bypassed the biometric hallway scanners. "They locked you in," Naomi states. It is a factual observation, completely devoid of theatrics or panic. I nod slowly. I am exhausted, physically freezing, and entirely untrusting. "You should probably just turn around and walk out right now," I tell her. "If you log that you found me in here, they will drag you right down with me." Naomi lets out a dry, bitter breath. She steps fully into the cold room and lets the heavy door click shut behind her, sealing us both inside the roaring chamber. "Last year," Naomi says quietly, stepping closer so I can hear her clearly over the massive ventilation fans. "I was also called a highly problematic employee because I found something in the structural maintenance logs that upper management desperately wanted buried." She looks directly into my eyes. I see the exact same quiet, hardened exhaustion in her expression that I feel deep in my own bones. She understands the brutal machine we are working inside. She knows exactly how this company treats women who see things they are not supposed to see. Without uttering another word, Naomi unclips a small, heavy-duty duffel bag from her shoulder. She unzips it and pulls out a thick, silver thermal emergency blanket. She steps forward and drapes it carefully over my shaking shoulders. The sudden retention of my own body heat feels like an absolute physical miracle. Next, she hands me an unopened plastic bottle of room-temperature water. Finally, she reaches into the bag and pulls out a ruggedized maintenance tablet. "This is hardwired directly to the building's localized operational network," Naomi explains, handing me the heavy device. "It is completely segregated from the main corporate administration servers. Nothing you do on this tablet will flag on their internal security monitoring tools." I wrap the crinkling silver foil tightly around my chest and take a long, slow drink of the water. The physical relief gives my brain the necessary space to process this sudden, massive shift in the battlefield. "How long have things been strange around here?" I ask her, my voice finally steadying. Naomi leans casually against the cold metal edge of the server rack. 2 weeks ago, someone with top-tier executive clearance initiated a quiet system override on the security cameras. she says. They deliberately changed the retention policy for the hallway feeds on the executive floor and this sub-basement level. Usually, we keep all video logs for 90 days. They slashed it down to 48 hours. It was exactly like someone wanted to drastically reduce the window of time we could look backwards during a highly sensitive period. My mind immediately connects her timeline. 2 weeks ago was exactly when the fraudulent secondary environment was secretly built to fake the failover tests. There is more, Naomi continues, scanning the dark rows of blinking indicator lights. The legal department has been camped on the top floor for 5 days. They have been ordering late dinners to the boardroom every night. The company has not announced any internal audit, merger, or external compliance review. You do not keep a dozen lawyers behind closed doors for a week unless you are preparing for a major crisis. I look at Naomi. I realize I have to make a choice right now. I can keep playing a dangerous solo game, or I can trust the one person who just threw me a lifeline. I choose to trust. I turn back to my secondary monitor. I tap the spacebar to clear the screensaver. I show Naomi the automated task scheduler. I point to the drafted confession email sitting quietly in my outbox, waiting patiently to fire off at exactly 15 minutes past 6 in the morning. Then, I pull up the raw, unedited system logs that explicitly prove the failure of the redundant arrays. Naomi leans in, reading the glowing lines of text. She does not gasp. She does not cover her mouth in shock. Her reaction is entirely pragmatic and sharply focused. She reads the fake email twice, completely absorbing the sheer malice of the setup. This is not just standard workplace bullying, Naomi whispers, standing up straight. This is a highly orchestrated corporate execution. They're setting me up to take the fall for a multi-million-dollar fraud, I tell her. When they open that door at 6, they expect me to be broken enough to let that email destroy me. So we blow the whistle right now, Naomi says, though her tone makes it sound more like a tactical question than a strict directive. I can pull the manual fire alarm. I can get the city fire department down here in exactly 8 minutes. We get you out of here with an army of official witnesses. No, I reply instantly. If we blow the alarm tonight, they will immediately realize the trap failed. Mason and Bryce will definitely panic, but they still hold full administrative access. They will scrub the primary servers, physically burn the backup drives, and tie up the whole truth in endless litigation. They will simply claim I hacked the system out of spite. I need them to walk into this room tomorrow morning believing they have completely won. I need them to step directly into their own snare. Naomi nods slowly. A small, tight smile forms on her lips. She understands the strategy perfectly. You do not interrupt the enemy when they are in the middle of making a fatal mistake. If you are going to stay in this freezer until morning, Naomi says, picking up her ruggedized maintenance tablet, then I need to make absolutely sure they cannot change the physical narrative of tonight. She rapidly taps the heavy screen of her device. They think they are clever with the digital network logs, but they do not understand the physical building infrastructure. I am creating a localized, heavily encrypted backup of the corridor camera feeds, starting from the exact moment they marched you down here. I am pulling the magnetic lock actuation logs that definitively prove Mason used his specific keycard to seal this door. I am even pulling the environmental sensor data to prove they knowingly left a human being locked in a room set at exactly 64 degrees overnight. I watch her work. Her fingers move with the same practiced, clinical precision that I use when rebuilding a shattered database. She is meticulously gathering the physical, real-world evidence to perfectly support the digital ghosts I have just unearthed. I am setting these building logs to mirror directly to a secure off-site server, Naomi explains, her eyes locked intensely on her screen. Even if they try to wipe the physical security feeds tomorrow morning, the clean copies will already be totally out of their reach. For the first time in 6 excruciating months, the crushing weight of professional isolation begins to lift completely off my shoulders. I am no longer a solitary woman fighting a shadow war against an entire corporate hierarchy. I finally have a true ally. I have a partner who knows exactly when to keep her mouth shut and exactly when to strike. We are standing together in the freezing dark, two women they thought they could easily erase, quietly building the absolute destruction of Oraline Grid Technologies. I lean much closer to the glowing screen of the crash cart monitor, my frozen fingers dancing across the mechanical keyboard. With the raw system logs safely secured on the isolated drive, I pivot my attention to the archived accounting ledgers. The terminal window rapidly fills with endless rows of transactional data. I trace the bizarre, heavily redacted purchase orders that were authorized by Leon Pike. The corporate funds do not just disappear into a generic administrative void. They flow systematically and continuously into a singular, highly obscure external vendor account. The vendor is listed as Blue Meridian Advisory. I run a deep background query on the company name using the terminal command line interface to bypass the standard external network filters. There is absolutely no active website. There is no corporate footprint, no client history, and no public list of employees. It is a complete digital ghost. I ask Naomi to use her isolated maintenance tablet to search the state business registry. She types rapidly, her face sharply illuminated by the harsh blue light of her screen. Within 2 minutes, she finds the original articles of incorporation. The registered managing director of Blue Meridian Advisory is a man named Richard Vance. Naomi reads the name aloud, her voice tight with absolute disgust. I recognize that name instantly. Richard Vance is Mason Crow's brother-in-law. Mason attended his wedding just 4 months ago and proudly showed pictures to the entire office. This is not just standard corporate negligence or reckless corner cutting. This is a highly calculated, active embezzlement pipeline. Mason and Leon are bleeding the company dry under the guise of emergency software consulting, quietly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into their own pockets. But the true horror fully sets in when I look at the specific billing codes attached to those fraudulent invoices. Every single payment made to Blue Meridian Advisory is billed directly against the Rivergate Mobility Authority account. I pull up the massive technical specifications for the Rivergate contract. This is not some harmless administrative database. It is the core data infrastructure for the entire regional traffic coordination network. This system is actively designed to manage the emergency vehicle routing protocols, the synchronized metropolitan traffic lights, and the central transit dispatch servers. If a natural disaster or a targeted cyber attack hits the city, this exact system is supposed to keep the ambulances moving and the evacuation routes flowing, and it is completely fundamentally broken. The failover architecture cannot even survive a basic simulated stress test without completely collapsing. Yet, Oraline Grid Technologies formally submitted the final readiness paperwork to the government, prominently stamping my professional name on every single page to falsely certify that the system had flawlessly passed every single safety protocol. They are perfectly willing to risk the absolute paralysis of an entire major metropolitan city just to secure a lucrative municipal contract. Naomi leans heavily over my shoulder, pointing a thick, calloused finger at the screen. She suggests we dig deeply into the human resources shadow drives. She knows exactly how this company operates, and she knows perpetrators like these never start their abuse with their biggest crime. They always practice their methods on smaller targets first. I access the employee complaint registry snapshot from 8 months ago. We uncover a deeply buried, heavily encrypted subfolder containing 3 formal grievances. I open the files one by one. The documents reveal a clear, devastatingly familiar pattern. 3 different female engineers worked directly under Mason and Bryce over the past 4 years. Each woman filed an extensive, meticulously detailed complaint regarding blatant gender discrimination, professional sabotage, and the brazen theft of their intellectual property. The narratives are completely identical to my own current experience. They describe the sudden removal from important meetings, the constant, subtle belittling of their technical expertise, and the deliberate isolation from the senior management team. At the bottom of each formal complaint, there's a final administrative note. The digital stamp reads that the issue was handled internally. Immediately after that stamp was applied to the files, all 3 women were quietly terminated, and their entire employment histories were permanently purged from the active corporate directory. They were systematically erased from the building. I am not an anomaly. I am simply the latest woman on a long, highly established assembly line of disposable targets. My fingers fly across the keys as I dig into the absolute highest tier of the executive archives. I find a recovered, half-deleted transcript from a closed-door board meeting held exactly 3 weeks ago. The document is a raw voice-to-text conversion log. The words on the screen completely shatter any remaining illusion that this is just the isolated work of a few rogue middle managers. The transcript features a direct, undeniable statement from our Chief Executive Officer, Victor Sloan. He is explicitly informed by Mason that the Rivergate network lacks the true technical capacity to handle a live deployment. Victor does not demand a delay. He does not ask for a structural review. Instead, Victor explicitly orders the team to forcefully push the compliance paperwork through the final approval stage anyway. He states clearly that the company desperately needs the initial 30% government advance payment to cover a massive quarterly revenue shortfall. The absolute highest authority in the building is the one actively driving the fraud. Then, I find the final, most terrifying layer of the entire conspiracy. I uncover a massive, newly executed corporate insurance policy. Just 45 days ago, Oraline Grid Technologies purchased a specialized premium cyber risk liability package from a massive international underwriting firm. I read the coverage limits. The potential payout for a catastrophic, unrecoverable system failure is absolutely staggering. It is set at $50 million. The entire, sickening architecture of their plan suddenly becomes crystal clear in my mind. They know the Rivergate system is going to inevitably fail. They are actively banking on it. When the traffic grid collapses, they will immediately launch my forged confession email. They will publicly fire me, dragging my pristine reputation through the mud to appease the furious city officials and the federal regulators. But they will not stop there. They will use the catastrophic failure and my supposed rogue sabotage to file a massive financial claim against their new cyber risk policy. They are not just shifting blame. They are planning to profit from the collapse and walk away with $50 million in insurance money. I push the heavy metal chair back from the desk. The deafening roar of the massive server room fans suddenly feels like total silence. A profound, fundamental shift occurs deep within my chest. My hands are no longer shaking from the freezing air. For the first time in 6 excruciating months, I feel cold, unmistakable clarity. Taking down Mason Crow is no longer enough. Firing Bryce Danner and Leon Pike will not solve anything. If I just cut off the visible branches, the deeply rotten roots of this company will simply grow new ones. Victor Sloan built a massive, highly efficient machine designed specifically to exploit brilliance, forge reality, and ruthlessly erase anyone who gets in the way of the profit margin. I look up at Naomi. She is watching me closely, her expression hard and completely ready for a fight. They are going to burn the city, blame me for the ashes, and collect $50 million, I tell her, my voice steady now. So what is the new objective? Naomi asks, gripping her heavy maintenance tablet tightly. The objective has changed, I reply, turning back to the glowing terminal. I am not just clearing my name. I am tearing this operation apart, and I am making sure this company never pushes another unverified line of code. I am not going to just hit a button and send a massive, disorganized dump of raw data to the entire company directory. That is the desperate, flailing reaction of an amateur. I know exactly how corporate defense mechanisms operate. If I blast those files to every inbox in the building, Victor's crisis management team will immediately quarantine the mail server. They will classify my message as a malicious insider cybersecurity threat. They will instantly terminate me for gross violations of data privacy policies. And they will successfully spin the truth into a story about a disgruntled, emotionally unstable employee trying to sabotage the firm out of spite. They are absolute masters at twisting facts into procedural violations. Instead, I begin constructing a pristine, utterly undeniable chain of evidence. I need this to be a surgical strike, not a messy explosion. I apply highly complex cryptographic time hashes to every single piece of raw data I extract from the immutable storage. This mathematically proves the exact moment the data was captured and guarantees it has not been altered by a single byte. I take the falsified failover reports and cross-reference them directly with the specific, time-stamped building environmental logs and biometric door access records that Naomi just secured. I package the evidence into highly organized, distinct data packets based on their specific themes. I create one encrypted folder explicitly detailing the technical fraud and the fake testing environments. I build a second folder mapping out the financial embezzlement pipeline flowing directly into Mason's family bank accounts. I assemble a third folder containing the HR cover-ups and the systematic erasure of the women who worked here before me. By isolating the data, I ensure that if their lawyers try to claim I fabricated one specific detail, the sheer mathematical weight of the surrounding evidence will immediately crush their defense. Naomi stands right beside my chair, her arms crossed tightly over her blue maintenance jumpsuit. She helps me identify the absolute perfect targets for our strike. We separate the packaged data into 3 highly targeted dossiers. The first dossier is routed entirely outside the company. I address it directly to the external lead investigator for the cyber risk insurance underwriter. Insurance conglomerates absolutely hate paying out $50 million claims. Their forensic accountants will tear Victor's fraudulent policy application into tiny shreds the second they see the internal memos proving the system was defective before the policy was signed. The second dossier goes straight to the Chief Procurement Oversight Officer at the Rivergate Mobility Authority. Government bureaucrats managing multi-million-dollar public infrastructure grants do not play around with rigged bidding processes or fake technical certifications. The third and final dossier is addressed to Arthur Sterling. He is the sole independent board director who routinely votes against Victor's reckless financial expansions. He is not part of their inner circle, and he will not hesitate to burn the current executive team to the ground to save the broader company and protect his own legal liability. I do not send the emails now. If I send them before the sun comes up, Victor will have hours to formulate a defense, hire outside counsel, and physically destroy the server room. I need the trap to spring when they are standing completely exposed in the bright light of day. I access a secure, external cloud server and configure a rigid delayed transmission protocol. It is a classic dead man's switch. I set the automated execution timer for exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is right in the middle of their scheduled live client demonstration. If I do not physically log into the terminal and input a complex, randomly generated cancellation key by 2:59, all 3 dossiers will automatically deploy to their respective targets simultaneously. But I also know how physical intimidation works in this building. I have to anticipate the worst-case scenario. They might physically rip my laptop from my hands this morning. They might instantly revoke my digital credentials the second I step out of this room. To counter this, I take the core, irrefutable evidence package and bury it deep inside a newly partitioned, highly obscured sector of the immutable backup cluster itself. I lock the partition behind a rotating cryptographic key that exists only in my memory. Even if they fire me, escort me out of the building with armed guards, and wipe every computer I have ever touched, the absolute truth will sit permanently in their own basement, entirely indestructible and waiting for the federal investigators. My watch reads 5:45 in the morning. Dawn is breaking above ground. It is time to reset the stage. I stop all technical operations. I close every active command window and systematically purge the session cache on the secondary crash cart monitor. The screen fades back to its generic, bouncing corporate logo. I pull a clean microfiber cloth from Naomi's heavy tool bag and carefully wipe down the mechanical keyboard, the trackpad, and the cold metal edges of the desk. I erase every single physical and digital fingerprint, adhering to my deeply ingrained habits of total precision. Naomi gives me a single, firm nod of profound respect. She packs up her ruggedized tablet, picks up her heavy canvas bag, and quietly slips out of the server room, disappearing into the dark maintenance corridors well before the official day shift security guards arrive at their posts. I take off the silver thermal emergency blanket, I fold it tightly and hide it securely beneath a loose raised floor tile in the darkest corner of the third server aisle. I walk back to the exact spot where they left me last night. I sit directly on the freezing, perforated metal floor. I pull my bare knees up to my chest. I allow the aggressive chill of the room to sink back into my skin. I let my body shiver naturally. I let my face remain pale, drawn, and utterly exhausted. I make myself look exactly like the thoroughly defeated, emotionally broken woman they desperately expect to find. Exactly at 6 in the morning, the heavy magnetic lock on the main door disengages with a loud, violent clank. The thick steel door swings wide open. A sudden rush of warm, conditioned hallway air floods into the freezing chamber. Mason Crow and Bryce Danner step confidently into the roaring noise of the server farm. They are holding steaming cups of expensive coffee. They look down at me with smug, deeply self-satisfied expressions. They fully expect to see a sobbing mess. They expect a frantic, broken employee who is ready to beg for her career. Instead, they see a pale, suspiciously quiet woman staring blankly at the wall. Mason steps closer, his polished leather shoes clicking sharply against the metal floor tiles. He looks down at me, his eyes entirely devoid of any genuine human empathy. He demands that I stand up. He uses his quiet, authoritative management voice to force me into an immediate apology. He tells me that I made a massive deal out of nothing last night, and that my unprofessional outburst was entirely unacceptable for a senior engineer. Bryce leans casually against the edge of a server rack, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He taps the sleek digital tablet tucked under his arm. He reminds me that the final technical sign-off is absolutely required before the afternoon client presentation. He tells me that if I want to keep my job, and if I want to salvage any shred of my professional reputation in this city, I need to walk upstairs, log into my terminal, and sign the document immediately. I do not scramble to my feet. I do not cry. I look up at them from the cold floor. My face remains completely blank. I keep my voice soft and perfectly level, masking the absolute calculated violence of my intentions. It sounds like a weak surrender, but it is actually the very first strike of the blade. I will sign what is the truth. By 8 in the morning, the open plan office on the 5th floor is buzzing with the manufactured, nervous energy of corporate survival. I walk slowly toward my cubicle. I am wearing the exact same wrinkled silk blouse and pencil skirt from last night. I let my shoulders slump heavily forward. I keep my eyes fixed firmly on the gray commercial carpet. Mason Crow has already been actively working the floor since 7 o'clock. I can hear the hushed, whispered conversations abruptly stopping the exact moment I walk past the glass partitions. He has proactively spread a carefully sanitized, highly destructive narrative. According to Mason, I suffered a severe emotional breakdown after the executive party. He told the entire engineering department that I lost my temper over a minor technical disagreement and demanded to sit alone in the restricted infrastructure zone to cool off. It is a brilliant preemptive strike on his part. He is actively framing my forced overnight imprisonment as a voluntary, hysterical timeout. At exactly 15 minutes past 9, my desk phone lights up. It is Celeste Quinn, the Senior Director of Human Resources. She does not ask if I have a moment to spare. She firmly requests my immediate presence in Conference Room 3. When I walk into the room, Celeste is already seated at the head of a polished mahogany table. A thick manila folder rests squarely in front of her. She uses a soothing, deeply patronizing voice, the kind of tone usually reserved for talking down a panic attack. "We are very concerned about your mental well-being. Alice," Celeste says, folding her hands neatly over the folder. "Your erratic behavior last night was deeply alarming to the management team. We feel that this environment might be placing too much pressure on you." She slides a heavily stapled document across the long table. It is a comprehensive severance agreement bundled with an absolutely airtight non-disclosure contract. They are offering me 6 months of full salary and completely subsidized health benefits, provided I immediately sign away my legal right to ever speak about my time at Oraline Grid Technologies. I do not shout at her. I do not throw the heavy corporate pen across the room or violently accuse her of participating in a massive fraud. I act exactly like a woman who is far too exhausted to fight back. I keep my voice barely above a whisper. The legal language in this packet is quite dense. Celeste, I tell her softly, pushing the document back across the polished wood just a few inches. I need you to please send all of your administrative directives and the specific terms of this agreement directly to my corporate email address. I also must request a full, physical copy of every single supporting technical document you want me to sign today, so I can have a standard employment lawyer review them. Celeste's perfectly painted smile tightens sharply at the corners. Her soothing tone drops a fraction of an octave. She clearly expected a tearful breakdown or a quick, deeply intimidated signature. She is profoundly irritated that she cannot simply push me out the door before the lunch hour, but she knows she cannot legally deny my request for a basic review period without violating standard state labor compliance laws. I return to my silent cubicle. 10 minutes later, a heavy interoffice mail envelope drops softly onto my keyboard. Naomi Mercer walks past my desk pushing a squeaking utility cart. She does not stop her pace, and she does not make any eye contact with me. Inside the unmarked envelope is a standard secure digital memory card. I quickly plug it into a hidden, encrypted partition on my workstation. It contains the exact corridor camera footage and the biometric magnetic lock logs we discussed in the basement. The data definitively proves the exact minute Mason sealed me in the cold room, and the exact minute he returned this morning. While I am copying the files, a completely unexpected message pops up on my personal encrypted messaging application. It is from Delilah Shaw, the former internal auditor who warned me not to sign anything on her final day at the office. She does not type a greeting. She just sends a secure file link with a single line of text saying she thought I might need this specific record today. I open the encrypted link. It is a cached folder containing an unedited, verbatim transcript from a departmental steering committee meeting that took place exactly 4 months ago. The transcript clearly shows Delilah explicitly warning Bryce Danner that the data packets he was presenting to the executive board were structurally flawed and highly indicative of a faked testing environment. Bryce aggressively shut her down on the official record, calling her concerns baseless and out of line. Delilah had quietly saved the receipt before they forced her to resign. I now possess absolute, undeniable proof that Bryce knew the system was a complete fabrication for months. At exactly 30 minutes past 11, Caleb Stroud practically trips over his own feet rushing into my cubicle. Caleb is a junior engineer. He usually keeps his head down, aggressively agrees with whatever Mason says, and desperately tries to stay completely invisible to upper management. Right now, he is visibly sweating. He looks around frantically to make sure nobody is watching us. He pulls his mobile phone from his pocket and slides it across my desk. "Look at the attendee list," Caleb whispers, his voice trembling slightly. He shows me a photograph he secretly took of Mason's digital calendar for the afternoon. I look closely at the screen. The event scheduled for 2 o'clock is not just a standard internal technical demonstration. The guest list is entirely different from what Mason told the engineering team this morning. The invite includes the senior partners from the outside legal firm, the lead risk adjusters from the cyber insurance conglomerate, and the primary procurement representatives from the Rivergate Mobility Authority. Caleb is actively panicking because he realizes the room is going to be packed with external government and financial heavyweights. He understands that this is not a routine demonstration. It is the final, legally binding signing ceremony. They absolutely need a certified, licensed technical expert to stand up in front of those powerful people and publicly swear the architecture is flawless. The entire scope of their immediate urgency suddenly makes perfect sense to me. Mason and our chief executive officer are aggressively rushing to lock the final contract and secure the initial multi-million-dollar government payout before anyone on the outside can potentially run an independent technical audit. They need me to sign the final technical validation this afternoon, or they need me to sign the non-disclosure agreement and resign immediately so they can claim I validated the system right before leaving for sudden personal health reasons. I thank Caleb softly and tell him to go back to his desk and act like everything is completely normal. I slide his phone back to him. I realize that any sudden, aggressive movement on my part right now will cause them to abort the afternoon meeting, lock down the servers, and scramble to cover their tracks. They are rushing because they are vulnerable. So, I make the conscious, highly strategic decision to simply sit quietly in the trap. For the rest of the morning, I play my assigned role to absolute perfection. I sit silently at my desk. I stare blankly at my dual monitors. I completely ignore the sympathetic, pitying looks from the junior staff walking by. I let Mason walk past my cubicle twice, ensuring he sees exactly what he desperately wants to see: a totally broken, submissive woman who has finally learned her place in the corporate hierarchy. I let them feel completely secure in their victory. I let them confidently step further and further into the massive, inescapable snare they spent 6 months building, entirely unaware that the ropes are now tightly wrapped around their own necks. By early afternoon, the atmosphere on the executive floor transforms completely. The casual, quiet tension of the morning is replaced by a high-stakes, frantic energy. At exactly 1 o'clock, Auraline Grid Technologies formally opens the doors to the main glass-walled boardroom. This is not the routine internal review Mason Crow had casually mentioned to the engineering staff. This is a massive, highly orchestrated presentation explicitly designed to prove to the Rivergate Mobility Authority that our regional failover architecture can flawlessly transition to the secondary backup center in a matter of minutes. Mason is standing near the front of the room, looking like a man preparing to accept a prestigious industry award. He is wearing a tailored, three-piece navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. He is practically vibrating with arrogant confidence, flashing his perfectly practiced corporate smile at everyone who walks through the heavy oak doors. Victor Sloan sits at the absolute head of the long mahogany table. Our chief executive officer projects an aura of absolute, untouchable calm. He leans back in his expensive leather chair, sipping sparkling water, looking exactly like a man who genuinely believes every single operational risk has been safely swept under the rug. I take a quiet seat near the back corner of the room, positioning myself perfectly to observe the entire space. As the room fills, my eyes scan the arriving guests. I immediately notice 3 distinct, highly out-of-place faces. They are not local government bureaucrats, and they are definitely not our internal engineers. The first is a woman in a sharp gray suit, sitting rigidly near the window. She has the unmistakable predatory posture of a senior corporate litigation attorney. The logo on her leather portfolio matches the massive cyber risk insurance conglomerate that underwrote Victor's fraudulent $50 million policy. The second is an older man with silver hair, quietly reviewing a thick stack of printed documents. I recognize his face from the annual corporate directory. It is Arthur Sterling, the fiercely independent board advisor who routinely challenges Victor's financial maneuvers. The third is a stern, sharply dressed man wearing a visitor badge that explicitly identifies him as an independent bidding compliance observer from the municipal government. None of these 3 individuals are officially introduced to the room. Victor and Mason actively ignore their presence, treating them like standard administrative wallflowers. But I know exactly why they are sitting in this room. Earlier this morning, I configured a preliminary, highly encrypted digital ping to quietly alert those specific individuals that a critical compliance review was occurring today. It was a tiny breadcrumb, just enough to physically draw them into the building before the massive, automated data dump scheduled for 3 o'clock actually detonates. The fact that they are sitting here, watching in absolute silence, means my bait worked perfectly. They have arrived to witness the lie in person, but none of them want to flip the table before seeing exactly how deeply the company intends to perjure itself on the official record. The digital clock on the wall ticks down to 15 minutes before the top of the hour. The room is growing loud with pre-meeting chatter. Suddenly, Bryce Danner slides into the empty chair right next to me. He smells heavily of expensive cologne and nervous sweat. He does not make eye contact. Instead, he shoves a sleek digital tablet aggressively onto the table in front of me. "We need your final digital authorization right now," Bryce whispers. his voice tight and demanding. "It is just a standard administrative formality for the minor system update we pushed this morning. Sign it, and we can finally put last night behind us." I do not reach for the digital pen. I slowly drag my finger down the glowing screen, carefully reading the dense legal text he expects me to blindly authorize. I do not just skim the document, I read every single line. Within 30 seconds, I spot the lethal trap completely hidden inside the technical jargon. The document is not a routine update authorization. The text has been heavily and deliberately altered. The new clauses explicitly name me as the sole, ultimate authority over the entire disaster recovery architecture. It formally transfers all legal liability for the system's operational readiness directly onto my shoulders. If I sign this screen, I am legally confirming to the municipal government and the insurance firm that the infrastructure is absolutely flawless, sealing my own fate the second the servers inevitably crash. I push the tablet back toward him. "I cannot sign this document, Bryce," I say, my voice calm and flat. "These liability clauses do not match the actual system logs." Bryce physically recoils as if I just slapped him. His face flushes a deep, angry red. "What are you talking about?" he hisses through clenched teeth. "You are holding up a multi-million-dollar presentation over semantics. Sign the damn screen." Mason notices the sudden commotion and quickly walks over to our corner. He looks down at the unsigned tablet, his polished smile dropping instantly. He leans in close to my face, dropping his voice to a threatening, jagged whisper. "You said you would sign what is true this morning. Do not play games with me right now. Put your name on the line, or I will have security physically remove you from this building." "The technical logs do not align with the legal text," I repeat, looking directly into Mason's furious eyes. "If I sign a false certification in front of an independent municipal observer, I am committing federal fraud." While Mason is silently fuming, my secure personal mobile phone vibrates once in my pocket. I glance down quickly. It is an automated, high-priority alert from the heavily partitioned maintenance network Naomi set up for me. The alert contains a string of red text. "Someone with senior executive network credentials is currently attempting to force an unauthorized deletion protocol on the immutable storage cluster in the sub-basement. They are actively trying to wipe the old snapshots." The opposing faction has finally smelled the danger. Maybe Celeste from Human Resources realized I was stalling. Maybe Victor noticed the unexpected guests and panicked. They are scrambling in the dark, desperately trying to burn the evidence of their faked testing environments before the presentation officially begins. But they are completely out of time. They are trying to wipe the surface-level directories, entirely unaware that the core, cryptographic evidence packages I built this morning are already buried deep inside a highly obscured, mathematically locked partition that they cannot possibly access with a few frantic clicks from a middle management account. The truth is already bolted to the floor of the server room. Mason violently snatches the tablet from the table, his knuckles turning white. He glares at me with absolute, unfiltered hatred. He spins around and marches back to the front of the boardroom, aggressively whispering something into Victor's ear. Victor's calm facade slips for a fraction of a second, his jaw clenching tightly, before he regains his composure and nods slightly at Mason. The digital clock on the wall hits 2 o'clock. The heavy boardroom doors are officially closed and locked from the inside. The massive presentation screens behind Victor illuminate with the bright, polished graphics of the Oraline corporate logo. The room falls completely silent. I sit back in my chair. Folding my hands neatly in my lap, I look at Mason, who is now nervously adjusting his expensive silk tie. I look at Victor, who is gripping his pen entirely too tightly. I look at the insurance lawyer and the municipal observer, who are watching the executives with cold, calculating eyes. A profound, incredibly sharp sense of irony washes over me. In order to successfully close this massive fraud and save their own lucrative careers, they absolutely need the technical demonstration to look perfect. They need the system to appear flawless. And to achieve that illusion, they are entirely dependent on the exact same woman they locked in a freezing basement just a few hours ago. They tried to burn me in total silence, and now they are desperately hoping I will stand up and save them in front of an audience. They have absolutely no idea that the ticking clock in my head is matching the final seconds of their professional lives. The lights in the executive boardroom dim slightly as the massive high-definition projection screen at the front of the room hums to life. Mason Crow confidently steps up to the oak podium. He smooths the lapels of his expensive navy suit and flashes a brilliant, entirely hollow smile at the assembled executives, lawyers, and government observers. He begins his presentation with the practiced cadence of a seasoned salesman. Slide after glossy slide flashes across the screen behind him. I sit in the back corner of the room, staring at the complex network topology diagrams and redundant array charts. Every single data point, every localized routing map, every carefully constructed load balancing algorithm on that screen was painstakingly designed by me over the past 4 weeks. Mason explicitly removed my name from the title slides and replaced it with his own. He is standing in front of the most powerful people in the city, brazenly wearing my intellectual property like a tailored coat. Mason raises his voice to ensure the people at the far end of the long mahogany table can hear him clearly. He boldly claims that the new architectural framework is entirely bulletproof. He looks directly at the municipal observer from the Rivergate Mobility Authority and declares that our system can execute a complete disaster recovery transition to the secondary data center almost instantaneously. He promises zero data loss and absolute continuity of regional traffic operations. It is a spectacular performance. It is also a complete fabrication. I know for an absolute fact that the complex routing protocols he is currently pointing to do not lead to the secondary data center at all. They point directly into a safely contained, local simulated sandbox. He is selling them a digital mirage. I shift my gaze away from Mason and look at our chief executive officer. Victor Sloan sits perfectly still at the head of the table. His hands are steepled neatly over a pristine leather portfolio. His face is an unreadable mask of cold, corporate detachment. He does not nod along with Mason. He does not add any supportive comments. Watching his rigid body language, the unspoken dynamic of the room becomes incredibly obvious to me. Victor knows the system is a hollow shell. He knows the demonstration is a rigged stage play. He is deliberately letting Mason do all the talking and make all the legally binding guarantees on the official record. If the municipal government or the insurance auditors ever discover the fraud, Victor is perfectly positioned to act shocked, cleanly sever his ambitious middle manager, and throw Mason directly to the wolves. Victor is entirely focused on protecting his own seat at the top of the pyramid. Then, the absolute first crack in their perfect facade violently splinters across the room. At 2:15 p.m., a harsh chorus of chimes ripples around the table. Nearly a dozen phones and tablets light up at once. The forged confession email has just landed in their inboxes. I understand it immediately. Sometime after dawn, someone changed the scheduled send time from 6:15 a.m. to 2:15 p.m. They wanted the fake resignation waiting in reserve in case the live demonstration failed in front of the clients. In the rush to control the room, they forgot to cancel the script. Mason briefly glances down at his own glowing smartwatch. A microsecond of genuine, unfiltered panic flashes across his eyes. He looks quickly at Bryce Danner, who is suddenly pale and staring in horror at his laptop screen. But Mason is a seasoned corporate survivor. He instantly pivots, seamlessly turning a catastrophic technical error into a weapon. He lets out a long, heavy sigh. He drops his shoulders and adopts a facial expression of profound, paternal disappointment. He presses his hands flat against the podium and looks apologetically at the government observer and the insurance lawyer. "I must apologize for this sudden interruption," Mason says, his voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. "You all likely just received a rather distressing internal communication." Alice Morris, our senior recovery specialist sitting right there in the back, has been under a tremendous amount of personal and professional stress lately. It appears she has just sent a department-wide email proactively confessing to introducing several severe configuration errors into our core environment. She has taken full responsibility and resigned. Mason shakes his head sadly, playing the role of the tragic, supportive manager flawlessly. He looks around the room, making direct eye contact with the board members. I ask for your patience, Mason continues smoothly. We have been actively working to clean up the messy code she left behind. It is highly possible that you might see a tiny fraction of localized latency during today's demonstration because of her erratic actions. But I assure you, my operations team has the situation completely under control. He genuinely believes he just executed a brilliant masterstroke. He thinks he just successfully inoculated the room against any minor glitches by completely sacrificing my reputation. He is entirely wrong. By allowing that forged email to deploy right now, Mason just committed a fatal, irreversible mistake. If the email had gone out quietly at dawn, human resources could have buried it as an internal personnel matter. But this room is currently occupied by a senior litigation attorney representing a $50 million cyber risk policy and a strict compliance observer for a massive government infrastructure contract. By publicly entering a digital confession of technical negligence onto the corporate network during an active compliance audit, Mason has just handed live, heavily time-stamped digital evidence directly over to external forensic investigators. They are no longer taking his word for it. The email has instantly pulled the entire narrative into the realm of auditable cyber law. I can literally see the insurance lawyer narrow her eyes and immediately begin typing furiously on her encrypted tablet. I do not stand up to defend myself. I do not shout that he is a liar. I remain perfectly seated, entirely motionless, leaning back in my chair. I let the heavy silence hang in the air. I let Mason continue talking for another 4 minutes. I need him to feel completely unchallenged. Every single additional sentence he speaks, every single guarantee he makes about the system's integrity, tightly knots the rope around his own neck. He is actively locking himself into a rigid timeline of events that will soon become a massive, undeniable mountain of perjury. I quietly observe the perimeter of the room. Naomi Mercer has silently slipped through the rear service entrance. She is standing inconspicuously by the heavy double oak doors, holding her building management radio. She looks directly at me over the heads of the seated executives. She gives me one slow, deliberate blink. She is confirming that the exterior hallway is secure and the digital building logs are fully locked away. Simultaneously, my personal mobile phone vibrates softly against my leg. It is a single encrypted text message from Delilah Shaw, operating from the outside. The message simply reads that the package is open. I shift my gaze down the long mahogany table. Arthur Sterling, the fiercely independent board advisor, is staring intently at his laptop screen. The delayed evidence dossier I explicitly routed to him has successfully bypassed the internal firewalls. I watch as the color completely drains from Arthur's face. His jaw tightens. He is looking at the raw, unaltered logs. He is looking at the financial embezzlement records. He is looking at the absolute truth, at the front of the room. Mason turns back toward the massive projection screen. He confidently places his right hand on the sleek wireless mouse resting on the podium. He announces to the breathless room that he is now going to manually initiate the live disaster recovery failover sequence. The ambient noise in the boardroom seems to vanish completely. I can hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning vents. I can hear the rapid ticking of the expensive analog clock mounted on the far wall. The atmospheric pressure in the room feels impossibly heavy, like the agonizingly stretched seconds right before a massive explosive charge detonates. This is the absolute point of no return. As Mason's finger hovers over the mouse button to trigger the fake demonstration, I realize the final moment has arrived. They are about to violently murder the truth one last time to secure their millions, or this exact room is going to watch their entire elaborate, fraudulent empire violently rip itself apart. Mason presses the heavy wireless mouse button. The massive projection screen instantly floods with brilliant green indicator lights. The graphical interface shows a flawless, high-speed transfer of data payloads from the primary servers to the supposed regional backup center. A polite, impressed murmur ripples through the executives sitting at the mahogany table. I push my chair back, The wooden legs scrape loudly against the hardwood floor. The sound cuts through the polite applause like a gunshot. I stand up to my full height. "Those data packets are not leaving this building," I state. My voice is not a shout, but it carries with absolute razor-sharp clarity across the entire boardroom. Every head in the room snaps toward the back corner. Mason's polished smile instantly vanishes, replaced by a deep, ugly scowl. "I have already explained that our former employee is suffering a severe mental health crisis," Mason says quickly, looking directly at the municipal observer. "Security is on their way to escort her out of the building. Please ignore this outburst. The routing sequence displayed on that screen is currently looping into a localized, walled-off simulated sandbox," I continue, completely ignoring Mason. I walk slowly down the side of the long table, closing the distance to the front of the room. The architecture cannot handle a live load. It never could. "She is entirely delusional," Bryce Danner shouts from his seat, his face pale and sweating profusely. "Look at the confession email she just sent to all of us. She broke the code herself, and now she is trying to drag us down with her." I reach the empty chair next to Arthur Sterling. I look directly at the independent board director. "Mr. Sterling, you have the encrypted dossier I sent you. Please check the cryptographic session identifier running on the live presentation screen against the immutable storage snapshot I secured last night." Arthur Sterling does not hesitate. He types rapidly on his laptop. He looks up, his face hardening into a mask of pure fury. "The hashes do not match," Arthur announces to the room, his voice echoing loudly. "The environment we are looking at is completely fabricated, and the email you all just received," I say, turning to face the insurance lawyer, "was not sent by me. It was generated by a delayed script on a mid-level service account. I can prove this because the timestamp on the creation of that automated task precisely matches the time I was being physically held against my will in the sub-basement." Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the boardroom push open. Naomi Mercer strides in, wearing her blue maintenance jumpsuit. She walks directly to the secondary projection console on the wall and plugs in her ruggedized tablet. A new image flashes onto the secondary screen. It is the raw security footage from the technical corridor. It clearly shows Mason, Bryce, and Leon aggressively marching me into the secure room last night. The video then displays the unalterable magnetic lock logs, proving the heavy steel door was sealed shut from 9 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock this morning. I was locked in a freezing room without a single device, I tell the completely stunned boardroom. While I was trapped in the dark, they drafted a fake resignation to use as a shield for their technical failures. The woman representing the cyber risk insurance conglomerate stands up. She does not look at Mason. She looks directly at our chief executive officer. "We have been reviewing the internal audit documents provided to us 10 minutes ago," she says, her tone colder than the server room floor. "This constitutes deliberate, systemic risk concealment. You submitted a $50 million policy application for an infrastructure you definitively knew was defective. This is textbook corporate insurance fraud." Victor Sloan immediately realizes his ship is sinking rapidly. The pristine, untouchable facade shatters. He stands up violently, knocking his leather chair backward. He points a trembling finger directly at Mason. "This is an absolute outrage," Victor shouts, his voice cracking with panic. Mason Crow went completely rogue. I had absolutely no knowledge of these fabricated tests or this appalling treatment of an employee, Mason. You are terminated effective immediately. Bryce, Leon, you are fired as well. We will cooperate fully with the authorities to prosecute these rogue actors. Victor is trying to execute his final survival strategy, cut off the infected limbs to save the head. Do not pretend you are innocent. Victor, I say, stepping right into the center of the room. I look at Arthur Sterling again. He nods and presses a key on his laptop. The massive projection screen behind Mason switches from the fake green metrics to a scanned, highly confidential legal document. It is the master bid proposal for the Rivergate Mobility Authority. That is the final municipal contract submission, I explain, looking directly into the lens of the municipal observer's glasses. Look at the final page. Victor Sloan applied his executive cryptographic signature to this document, legally certifying the system's readiness. Exactly 3 days after he was directly informed in a recorded executive session that the architecture was failing, the oxygen completely leaves the room. The narrative shifts instantly. This is no longer a story about a few greedy middle managers bullying a female engineer. This is a massive, coordinated criminal conspiracy orchestrated from the absolute pinnacle of the corporate hierarchy. Mason Crowe completely loses his mind. The carefully constructed corporate disguise melts away, revealing the pathetic, cornered predator underneath. He lunges away from the podium, his face red and contorted with rage. "You should have just signed the damn document and stayed quiet," Mason screams at me, his voice tearing through the silent room. "You were nothing. We brought you here to be a name on a piece of paper. You were supposed to take the fall so we could get paid." A heavy, suffocating silence follows his outburst. Mason freezes, his chest heaving, slowly realizing that he just screamed a full, unprompted confession of the entire scapegoat plot in front of a government observer, a hostile board member, and a federal insurance litigator. Arthur Sterling stands up. He straightens his suit jacket. He speaks with the absolute authority of a man who just seized total control of a burning company. "Victor, Mason, Bryce, Leon, and Celeste Quinn," Arthur says, his voice dangerously calm. "You are all immediately suspended without pay pending a full federal investigation. Security will escort you out now. Effective immediately. You are barred from accessing any company system or device." The municipal observer closes his heavy notebook with a loud snap. The Rivergate contract is officially frozen. Expect a call from the district attorney by tomorrow morning. The insurance lawyer simply packs her briefcase and walks out of the room without another word, effectively signaling the beginning of a massive, financially ruinous legal war against the former executives. As the building's security guards march a pale, trembling Victor Sloan and a completely shattered Mason Crowe out of the boardroom, Arthur Sterling turns to me. The room is mostly empty now, save for Naomi standing quietly by the doors. "You just saved this company from a $50 million federal indictment." "Alice," Arthur says, rubbing his forehead. "When the dust settles, the board is going to need a new chief operations officer. The seat Mason just vacated is yours if you want it." I look at the empty chair at the head of the table. I think about the freezing cold of the server room. I think about the 3 women who were systematically erased before me. "I do not want his job," I reply firmly. "I want you to create a completely independent Office of Resilience Oversight. I want full financial restitution and restored public credit given to the 3 female engineers who were illegally forced out of this company over the last 4 years. I want their severance packages paid out of Victor's frozen executive bonuses. And I want absolute, unquestioned authority to restructure the entire technical architecture of this firm from the ground up." Arthur Sterling looks at me for a long time. Then he extends his hand. "Consider it done." Several months later, the heavy mechanical hum of the Oraline data center feels entirely different. I am no longer the invisible woman shivering in a thin skirt. I am the head of the newly established Oversight Division. My office is not a cubicle. It is the sprawling glass suite that used to belong to Victor Sloan. The massive government fines and the insurance settlements nearly bankrupted the firm, but the new board survived by completely surrendering the technical operations to my absolute control. The men who locked me in the dark are currently facing severe federal fraud charges and years of legal battles. The building that once tried to silently bury me now strictly operates on the precise, unbending protocols that I personally authored. That is the deepest, most permanent revenge. I did not just make them fall. I forced the entire corrupt machine to survive under the heavy, undeniable weight of my truth. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Please drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.